"Hey, old man, are you deaf?" The voice cut through the humid afternoon air like a whip crack. Lieutenant Davis, leader of the county's elite SWAT team, stood with his hands on his hips, his tactical gear a stark black against the dusty brown of the firing range. His face, flushed with frustration and heat, was aimed at the stooped figure of a man tending to the rose bushes that lined the walkway to the range office. "This is a live-fire area. You can't just be pottering around here. Get out!" The old man didn't flinch. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his gnarled hands carefully snipping a dead bloom from a bush. He wore faded denim overalls over a pale, sweat-stained shirt and a floppy canvas hat that shadowed most of his face. He looked like he'd been planted there with the roses decades ago and had simply grown with them. Several of the younger SWAT officers, all muscle and swagger, snickered behind Davis. To them, this was just another part of a deeply frustrating day. They'd been running drills since sunrise, and their performance on the long-distance precision course was, to put it mildly, abysmal. Their star sniper couldn't hit the hostage simulation target at 300 yards to save his life, and Davis's temper had been fraying with every missed shot. The old man was just a convenient new target for his ire. The gardener, Joseph, finally finished his cut, placing the dead flower gently into a small bucket at his feet. He straightened up, a process that seemed to take a few seconds, his back protesting the movement. He turned, and his eyes, a surprisingly clear and pale blue, found the furious officer. He didn't look scared or even annoyed. He just looked patient. "I'm almost done, son," he said, his voice raspy with age but steady. "Just clearing the deadheads. They'll choke the new growth otherwise." The word son was like a lit match on gasoline. Lieutenant Davis's jaw tightened. He was 34 years old, a decorated officer, the youngest man ever to make SWAT commander in this county. He was used to deference, to respect, to immediate and unquestioning obedience. To be called son by this dusty old relic in front of his men was an intolerable insult. He strode forward, his boots crunching on the gravel path, stopping just a foot from the gardener. The size difference was stark. Davis was a wall of conditioned muscle and body armor, while the old man seemed fragile, a bundle of sticks held together by worn fabric. "Listen to me, Grandpa. I don't care about your goddamn flowers. This is a restricted area. My team is conducting a qualification that costs this county thousands of dollars. Your presence here is a safety violation and a distraction. Now, I'm going to say it one more time. Get out." He punctuated each of the last 3 words with a sharp jab of his finger toward the parking lot. Joseph's gaze didn't waver. It drifted from Davis's furious face down to the state-of-the-art rifle slung across his chest, then to the men watching, their smirks barely concealed. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "All right," he said, his voice still quiet. He picked up his bucket and his shears. He didn't hurry. His movements were economical, unbothered. It was this lack of reaction, this placid refusal to be intimidated, that enraged Davis more than anything else. It felt like a silent judgment, as if the old man knew something he didn't. As Joseph began his slow, shuffling walk away, Davis called out to his back, "And get your hearing checked while you're at it. This isn't a retirement home." The laughter from his team was louder this time, a chorus of masculine approval for their leader's dominance. They felt powerful, putting the old man in his place. It was a small, petty victory on a day of professional failure. From the observation tower overlooking the range, Deputy Evans watched the entire exchange through a pair of binoculars, a sour taste in his mouth. A former Marine Scout sniper with 2 tours in Afghanistan, Evans was now the county's senior range safety officer. His job was to oversee firearms training, a role that gave him a front-row seat to the egos and insecurities of law enforcement. He had a deep, abiding respect for the difficult job these men did, but he had zero tolerance for the kind of arrogance Davis was displaying. It was the kind of pride that got people killed. He lowered the binoculars and focused his naked eye on the old gardener, who was now storing his tools in a small maintenance shed near the edge of the property. Evans had seen the man around for years. His name was Joe, and he was a contract gardener who came twice a week. He was quiet, kept to himself, and the roses he tended were the only beautiful thing in this whole dusty, lead-filled compound. But today, Evans saw something different. He'd seen it when Davis had gotten in the old man's face. Joe hadn't recoiled. He hadn't even blinked. His posture, while stooped by age, had a peculiar stillness to it, a rootedness. His feet were perfectly planted, his weight centered. It was the subtle, unconscious stance of a man who had spent a lifetime being ready. Then, there was the way his eyes had scanned the SWAT team. Not with fear, but with a calm, assessing quality. It was a look Evans had seen before in the eyes of seasoned operators in far-flung, dangerous places. It was the look of a man who could measure threat in a single heartbeat. Evans raised his binoculars again, zooming in on Joe as he locked the shed. There was something pinned to the collar of his faded work shirt, hidden under the bib of his overalls. It was a small dark piece of metal, so old and worn that it barely reflected the light. It looked like a piece of junk, a forgotten trinket. But its shape was specific. A downward-pointing sword crossed by a lightning bolt and an arrow. Evans felt a jolt, a sudden electric shock of recognition. It couldn't be. He focused the binoculars, trying to get a clearer view. The metal was too tarnished, the details too obscure. It was probably nothing. A coincidence. Still, the image was burned into his mind as he turned his attention back to the firing line where Davis was once again screaming at his sniper. The drill was a nightmare. The target was a steel silhouette at 300 yards, partially obscured by a hostage plate. The kill zone was a 4-inch circle in the center of the head. To make it harder, the target was positioned behind a simulated window frame, a narrow vertical opening that left almost no room for error. The wind, gusting unpredictably across the open range, was pushing the rounds consistently to the right. The team's sniper, a young, usually competent officer named Casey, was completely rattled. He'd sent 5 rounds downrange, and not a single one had found its mark. The first had missed the opening entirely, smacking into the wooden frame. The next 3 had been pushed by the wind, impacting inches to the right of the target. The last one, overcorrected, had struck the hostage plate with a loud, damning clang. "Damn it, Casey, are you even trying?" Davis roared, his voice echoing across the range. "That's a dead hostage! That's a failed mission! What is wrong with you?" Casey, sweating profusely under his helmet, pulled his eye away from the scope. "Sir, the wind it's shifting every few seconds. I get a read, I set my hold, and by the time I squeeze, it's changed." Davis scoffed, his face a mask of disgust. "Excuses. A real operator works with the conditions he's given. You don't get to ask the bad guys to wait for a calm day." He snatched the data book from Casey's partner. "Your dope is all wrong. You're not reading the Mirage correctly. Give me the rifle." Davis, who had been a designated marksman on the team before his promotion, was determined to show them how it was done. He settled in behind the multi-$1,000 rifle, a marvel of modern engineering. He laid down on the mat, adjusted the bipod, and settled his eye to the scope. He took a few deep breaths, a parody of the calm he was trying to project. He spent a full minute watching the heat waves ripple through his scope, trying to get a feel for the wind. He fired. The bullet smacked into the steel frame, splintering wood nowhere near the opening. A dead silence fell over the team. Davis's face went from red to a blotchy purple. He'd just failed more spectacularly than the man he'd been berating. It was into this thick, humiliated silence that a quiet voice spoke. "The wind's not your problem." Every head snapped around. Joseph, the old gardener, was standing there, his bucket of dead roses in one hand. He hadn't left. He'd simply moved to the edge of the concrete pad, watching. He gestured with his chin toward the rifle. "Your parallax is off and your scope isn't level. With the receiver." Davis stared at him, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. The sheer audacity of it was stunning. "What did you just say to me?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. The rest of the team looked on, wide-eyed, anticipating a Vesuvian eruption. Joseph pointed a dirt-caked finger at the high-end scope. "Whoever mounted that didn't use a leveling kit. You're canting the rifle to compensate, but you're not doing it consistently. It's why your misses are all over the place. At 100 yards, you might not notice. At 300 with that wind, it's throwing your shots." A few of the officers exchanged confused glances. They had no idea what he was talking about. But Deputy Evans, still watching from the tower, felt a cold chill run down his spine. The old man wasn't just talking. He was diagnosing a complex marksmanship problem with the casual expertise of a master gunsmith. He was right. A canted scope would absolutely produce the kinds of inconsistent misses they were seeing. It was a rookie mistake in mounting, but one that was incredibly difficult to diagnose on the fly. Down on the range, Davis's disbelief was rapidly turning back into white-hot fury. This old man, this nobody, was not only questioning his equipment but his team's competence, in front of everyone. "Is that so?" Davis said, a mocking sneer spreading across his face. He stood up and gestured magnanimously toward the rifle. "Well, by all means, Mr. Expert. You seem to have all the answers. Why don't you show us how it's done?" The challenge hung in the air, thick with ridicule. The SWAT team chuckled, the tension breaking as they circled in for the punchline. This was going to be hilarious. The old gardener, who probably hadn't held anything more dangerous than a hedge trimmer in 50 years, was going to try and shoot their state-of-the-art sniper system. Davis folded his arms, a smug grin plastered on his face. "Go on, Grandpa. Don't be shy. Show us how a real man shoots." He expected the old man to stammer, to back down, to shuffle away in embarrassment. But Joseph didn't. He just looked at Davis with those unnervingly calm blue eyes, then glanced at the rifle lying on the shooting mat. He set his bucket down carefully, took off his floppy hat and wiped his hands on his overalls. "Mind if I have a look?" he asked, his voice still quiet and raspy. It was the same question he'd asked about a rosebush earlier, delivered with the same simple sincerity. The absurdity was too much for Davis. He laughed out loud, a harsh, barking sound. "Have a look. Be my guest. Pick it up. But be careful, it's heavy. Wouldn't want you to throw your back out." He gestured to Casey. "Get out of his way. Let the master work his magic." Casey scrambled up, happy to be out of the hot seat, and the team created a semicircle, ready for the show. Joseph walked forward, his steps slow but not unsteady. He knelt down, not with the creaking awkwardness of an old man, but with a fluid, practiced motion that put his knee exactly where it needed to be. And then his hands touched the rifle. The moment his fingers, gnarled, stained with earth but surprisingly steady, closed around the pistol grip and the forestock, a change occurred. It was like watching a dormant circuit suddenly flood with electricity. His entire posture shifted. His back straightened. The stoop of age vanished, replaced by a solid, immovable triangle of support formed by his body and the ground. He wasn't just holding the rifle, he was part of it. The 20-pound weapon system seemed to become weightless in his grasp. Deputy Evans, watching through his binoculars, felt his heart begin to pound against his ribs. He saw it all. The perfect grip, high on the backstrap. The way his left hand didn't clutch the stock but guided it, his thumb pointing toward the target. The seamless motion as he pulled the rifle into the pocket of his shoulder, creating a bond of flesh and steel so complete it was as if he'd been born holding it. He didn't fumble. He didn't hesitate. with an economy of motion that screamed thousands upon thousands of hours of repetition. He checked the action, confirmed the chamber was clear, and then settled behind the scope. His cheek found the stock, not with a bump, but with a soft, perfect weld. His breathing, which had been the shallow breath of an old man, deepened. He took one long, slow breath in, and let it halfway out, and held it. In that moment of absolute stillness, the entire range seemed to fall silent. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. The SWAT team's smirks had vanished, replaced by looks of confusion and a dawning, uncomfortable sense of awe. This wasn't the fumbling old man they'd expected. This was something else entirely. Joseph's eye was at the scope. He didn't fire. He just waited, his body as still as the concrete he knelt on. He was reading the wind, not with the frantic desperation of Davis, but with an ancient, intuitive understanding. He seemed to be feeling it on his skin, tasting it in the air. He made a minuscule adjustment to the elevation turret on the scope. Click, click, 2 precise movements, his fingers moving by instinct alone. Then another tiny adjustment to the windage knob. He wasn't guessing. He was calculating. A brief, fragmented memory flashed behind his eyes, the smell of jungle rot and cordite, the oppressive green canopy, the whisper of a spotter calling out windage in a language only they understood. It was a ghost of a lifetime ago. But the feeling, the instinct, it was still there embedded in his very soul. He took another breath, held it. The trigger didn't move, and then it did. A clean, surprising break that no one saw coming. The rifle boomed, a deep-throated roar that was sharper, more final than any of the previous shots. 300 yards away, a puff of dust and paint exploded from the exact center of the 4-inch circle on the target's head. A perfect shot. Dead center. The SWAT team stared, stunned into silence. Davis's jaw was slack. It had to be a fluke, a 1 in a million lucky shot, but Joseph wasn't finished. He worked the bolt action with a fluid, practiced motion, up, back, forward, down, so fast and smooth it was a single blur of movement. He was already back on target before the empty brass casing had finished its arc and tinkled onto the concrete. He looked through the scope for another second. "There's a second target, isn't there?" he said, his voice a low rumble, not looking up. "Supposed to simulate a secondary threat behind the primary." No one answered. They didn't know. It was an advanced feature of the target system they'd never even used. Before anyone could process the question, he fired again. The rifle cracked. 300 yards away, another puff of dust erupted, seemingly from the exact same spot. The team stared, confused. Had he missed? Had he hit the same hole? Davis started to open his mouth, a cynical remark forming on his lips, when the range's electronic scoring system, linked to sensors on the targets, suddenly pinged. The screen on a nearby tablet lit up. 2 hits, both in the center bullseye. The second shot had passed perfectly through the hole created by the first, striking a secondary plate hidden behind it. He had threaded the needle. Twice. It wasn't just an incredible feat of marksmanship. It was a shot that bordered on the physically impossible. It was a shot that spoke of a level of skill so far beyond their comprehension that it felt like magic. The silence that followed was profound. Absolute. It was the sound of a dozen arrogant men having their entire professional reality shattered in the space of 3 seconds. Into that deafening silence, Deputy Evans's boots crunched on the gravel. He had come down from the tower, his face a grim, reverent mask. He walked past the frozen forms of the SWAT team, his eyes fixed only on the old man who was now calmly clearing the rifle and placing it back on the mat. Evans stopped beside him, his gaze dropping to the tarnished pin on Joseph's collar now clearly visible. The sword, the lightning bolt, the arrow. De oppresso liber. To free the oppressed. He knew now. It wasn't a coincidence. He cleared his throat, his own voice sounding rough with emotion. "Master Sergeant," he began, the title coming out with the force of a prayer. "Pardon me for asking, but MACV-SOG?" Joseph looked up from the rifle, his pale blue eyes meeting Evans's. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in them. Not pride, but a deep, ancient sorrow. A weariness that went beyond his 82 years. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That was all the confirmation Evans needed. The former Marine Scout sniper, a man who had seen his own share of combat, whose body was a roadmap of scars and hard-won experience, did the only thing that felt right. He snapped his heels together. His back went ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a salute so sharp, so precise it could have cut glass. He held it there, his arm trembling slightly with the weight of the gesture, his eyes locked on the old gardener. It was a salute of absolute, unconditional respect, a salute from one warrior to another, across generations, across wars, across worlds. He was saluting not just the man, but the history, the sacrifice, the impossible things this quiet, humble gardener had done in the shadows so that men like Davis could play soldier in the sun. The SWAT team stared, their confusion turning to utter shock. They saw the salute, they saw the tears welling in the hardened deputy's eyes, and they finally began to understand. This was not a joke. This was real. Evans finally lowered his hand, though his posture remained rigid. He turned to face Lieutenant Davis and his shell-shocked team. His voice was low, but it carried the authority of absolute truth. "For your education, Lieutenant," he said, his words sharp and clean as broken glass, "you are standing in the presence of Master Sergeant Joseph Garrison. The pin on his collar is the crest of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, Studies and Observations Group. MACV-SOG." He let the name hang in the air. A few of the older officers who were military history buffs went pale. "That's a nice rifle you've got there," Evans continued, his voice dripping with controlled fury. "It can hit a target at 300 yards. Master Sergeant Garrison and his team used to make shots at 3 times that distance in a jungle, in the dark, with rifles that were half as good while being hunted by an entire enemy division." He took a step toward Davis, who involuntarily flinched. He didn't have a shooting mat, a data book, or a weather station. He had the ground, the wind on his face, and his brother's. The things he did, the places he went, they don't exist on any official map. The men he served with don't exist on any official record. They were ghosts. Evans pointed a trembling finger at the target. What he just did, threading a needle at 300 yards, that wasn't a party trick. That was a Tuesday for the men of SWAT. That was how they stayed alive. That was how they brought their brothers home. He finally looked at Davis, his eyes burning with contempt. "And you called him Grandpa." The word landed like a physical blow. Davis's face, which had been a mask of shock, crumpled. The color drained from it, leaving behind a pasty, sickened gray. The smug superiority, the arrogant pride, it all evaporated, leaving only a hollowed-out shell of a man confronted with his own staggering ignorance. He looked at Joseph, who was now slowly getting to his feet, his movements once again those of a tired old man. The lightning was gone, the circuit dormant once more. The Master Sergeant was gone, and the gardener was back. Davis stumbled forward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. "Sir, I'm sorry," he stammered, the word "sir" feeling pathetic and inadequate. "I didn't know. I had no idea." Joseph Garrison simply picked up his floppy canvas hat and settled it back on his head, shadowing his face once more. He looked at the young, broken officer, and there was no anger in his eyes, there was no triumph. There was only a quiet, profound sadness. He patted Davis lightly on his armored shoulder. "It's a fine rifle," he said, his voice gentle. "Just needs a steady hand and a level scope." He then turned and picked up his bucket of dead-headed roses. His work was done. He started his slow walk back toward the little maintenance shed, his posture once again stooped, his gait the shuffling walk of an old man whose bones ached. He didn't look back. The vindication wasn't for him. He had no need of it. It was for the men whose faces he still saw in his dreams, the ghosts who walked with him in his quiet garden. The lesson was for the living. Deputy Evans watched him go, his throat thick with emotion. He turned back to the SWAT team. They stood frozen, ashamed, their expensive gear suddenly feeling like a cheap costume. They weren't warriors. They were boys who had just been shown what a real one looked like. And he looked like a tired old man who tended roses. Evans walked over to Casey, the young sniper, and clapped him on the shoulder. "Forget about the wind," he said quietly. "Today, you learned about trigger control and humility. That's a lesson worth more than any qualification." He then followed after Joseph, catching up to him near the shed. For a moment, neither man spoke. They just stood there, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dusty ground. "Master Sergeant," Evans said finally, "it was an honor." Joseph turned, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "It's just Joe," he said. "That was a long time ago." He reached out a hand, not for a handshake, but to gently touch the faded Marine Corps emblem tattooed on Evans's forearm. "You take care of yourself, son," he said. And then he turned, unlocked his old, beat-up pickup truck and drove away, leaving behind a firing range full of humbled men and the faint, sweet scent of roses.